Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. I am JustusRStone and today I'm continuing my discussion, full-on spoilers, of the manga Pandora Hearts by Jun Mochizuki. If you are not read volume number 10, do not watch this video unless you want a bunch of major things spoiled for you, because that is what this video series is all about. Also, if you're new to the series and you don't know what this is going on, I have not read beyond volume number 10, so anything that I speculate at or wonder at, I really don't know what happens past this volume. So let's get right into it, because volume number 10 had some crazy reveals in it. This is getting close to the halfway point of the series, and I'm guessing that this is starting sort of the ball rolling towards what's going to come over the next, I guess it's 14 volumes, because I think there's 24 volumes in total for Pandora Hearts. So we start off with a big backstory of Vince and Gil. We finally find out, well, something that I predicted, I think, a little while ago, that Gil was, in fact, the valet for Jack Vesalius. This makes total sense, of course. I mean, I think it was played out pretty obviously, especially the fact that it was Gil that found Jack first in Cheshire Cat's domain. So it's really not that big a shock, but I'd say it's a really good payoff because it really helps cement that relationship between Oz and between Gil, and why Gil feels so strongly for Oz. We find out that Vincent and Gil have had a pretty tough life. They were basically abandoned by their parents because Vincent, with his one red eye, was considered a child of ill omen. So at the time, basically, people thought that all sorts of bad things would happen if Vincent was around, and so he was abandoned, he was mistreated, and it was only Gil who stood by him and protected him. And even though there were times when Gil thought that that was enough, he couldn't take it anymore, he was going to abandon Vincent, he never did. He always came back, he always stuck by his brother. And so we learn in this, basically, first of all, we learn that Gil has this incredible sense of wanting to belong, wanting to help, wanting to have a place that he can feel that he contributes. We also realize why it is that Vincent is so dedicated to Gil regardless of what's been going on. So, of course, Vince and Gil, they are homeless on the streets. They've done what they can to survive, stolen, been pets, he said, for some rich folks, stuff like that. But finally, they collapse on the street, they can't go on, and it's Jack Vesalius that finds them, brings them home, nurses them back to health, and then invites Gil to become his valet. Now, this is where we see a lot of the character of Jack Vesalius. I mean, he sort of struck me as being a pretty positive character right from the start. In fact, even his relationship with Alice, I kind of see it almost like, it's almost pity. Like, I don't want to say it's entirely that. I think there is maybe some romantic intention on his part, but I think that most of it is him feeling sorry for this girl because she's trapped in this tower. She's been denied pretty much a normal life, and Jack wants to give her joy. He wants her to smile and laugh and everything else. And we see the same thing now, him taking in Vince and Gil, and he even cuts Vince's hair, and Vince is like, don't do it because then people will see my eye. And Jack's like, it doesn't matter anymore because here you're safe, you won't be harassed anymore. So we see how Gil has this incredible sense of loyalty to Jack for saving them, for accepting them. We see that Vincent has, I mean, as much as he has some strong feelings for Jack, for helping them out, ultimately it is Gil that he sees as being the one who has saved him time and time again. But it's interesting because now we see Alice from a different point of view, because up until this point, we've seen Vincent basically from outsiders' points of view, and particularly from Alice, he seemed to be this really vile individual. But now we see things sort of twisted around. Now we see that Vincent obviously has been incredibly scarred because of how he's been treated. And, I couldn't help but feel some sympathy for this kid. And then we see his interactions with Alice. And it's funny because it flips. Because when we saw it before, Alice was like, I hate Vince. I hate him. I hate him. I hate him. And now we see Vincent where he's like, I hate Alice. I hate her, because she is like a bitch. She is just rude and ignorant, and she starts right in again about how Vincent's a child of ill omen and asking all these incredibly inappropriate questions, which makes Gil fly off the handle, understandably. And Vincent is like, I don't want anyone to ever make Gil look like that again. I hate her, blah, 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 blah. So you can kind of see where Vincent now is more of a sympathetic character. Like, his motivation here now makes a lot more sense. And we see now then too that there's another party that is exerting influence on Gil and Vince, and that is the Barbises. In the case of Gil, it seems to be this whole thing where it was planted in his head that he should kill anybody who gets close to his master, who tries to interfere with his master. I don't know what the point of this was. I don't know if this was them hoping that he would see Alice as a threat or an issue and he would kill her because they didn't want her to be used by the Baskervilles. That's not said, and I don't think we'll probably find out for a little while. On the other hand, we have the Lady Barbas. She is the one who tells Vincent how to open the abyss. And she does this because Vincent has been told by Alice that Glenn is going to use Gilbert's body as a vessel to carry on his immortal soul. So we find out that, yes, Glenn Baskerville has lived for a very, very, very long time, and that he's done this basically by passing his soul along with his chains into new vessels, into new bodies as he goes. So this sort of answers a question that I had last time where I was like, if Lacey was sacrificed to the abyss and Lacey was the mother of the two Alices, how did Glenn, like, how does that work timeline-wise? Because the girls seem a lot older than what Glenn would have been, blah, blah. So we now see this, right? So we now know that Glenn, even though he looks like a younger man, in reality, he's probably quite a bit older. Well, a lot older. We don't even know how old he is. We just know that this is something that he does. But what's really telling in this is that Alice is telling Vincent, she's like, first of all, Glenn has 5 chains, 5 black-winged chains within him. Jabberwock, Griffin, Raven, Owl, and Dodo. And that these things, I'm guessing, are what give him this power over the abyss. Because remember, we were told back when Gil got Raven that if they had to be like these black-winged chains to get into the abyss, to open a way into the abyss, and to be able to get out again at sort of will, right? So Glenn has these 5 in him. But what we find out now, of course, as we extrapolate this whole thing, we start thinking, but these minus Jabberwock, well, I mean, we don't know about Dodo and Owl, I guess. But so Jabberwock, Dodo, and Owl, I'm not too sure about. But we know for a fact the Night Ray family had Raven. And we know for a fact, we find out later on, that the Vesalius family has Griffin. So it's almost like by Glenn being destroyed, at least 4 of his chains ended up being sort of divided from his body and coming under control of each of the 4 major dukedoms. And this could explain how these dukedoms elevated themselves to such levels of power. It also made me kind of curious about the whole fact that in order to get his soul into another body, the first thing that Glenn would have to do is to put a chain of his into that body. And in Gilbert's case, it was meant to be Raven, which is exactly the chain that Gil currently has. So I was kind of like, ooh, so now this is opening doors, right? Because, well, I'm getting ahead of myself, but it's opening doors because it's almost like we know that Glenn coming back seems to be sort of where this is going. This whole story seems to be wedging towards the return of Glenn Baskerville and whatever sort of plan or machinations he had going, coming back. We know that Elliot is having dreams and visions and stuff that heavily suggest that he was Glenn in a previous life. But now we have Gil, who has Raven and was meant to be the vessel for Glenn. So we're not too. I'm still wondering if this is going to play out differently. Like, I'm almost wondering if this whole thing with Elliot is too obvious. I think I said that the last time. I was like, maybe this is just too obvious, but I don't know. We're going to see how this plays out. So it's Alice who initially tells Vincent that, oh yeah, your brother's going to get killed. Like, Glenn's going to put his soul into him, and Glenn's soul will basically erase Gilbert's soul, and he'll be just Glenn from that point on. And then Barbas, the lady Barbas, she says, okay, well, I can tell you how to save your brother. We need to interrupt the ritual. And to do that, you need to open the door to the abyss. And so this kind of explains, I guess, how the Baskervilles were kind of taken by surprise that the door to the abyss opened up, because they didn't expect it. It also can explain why Vincent and Gilbert showed up in the abyss, because Vince was the one who intentionally opened the door. We also find out how Gilbert got injured. Apparently he took a sword slash to the back protecting Jack. So much revealed in just this first part. Then we flash now to our modern era heroes, where we start finding out even more stuff. So basically we find out that Oz, yes, he has used Alice's powers to summon this scythe. He's used it to incapacitate these ghouls or zombies or whatever you want to call them. And even though personality-wise, when he greets Leo and Elliot, he seems like normal Oz, then all of a sudden he kind of shifts. And the art, the way it looked like he was taking a swing with the scythe at Elliot, but in reality he was going after a zombie that was threatening Leo. And Oz makes the statement, he's like, you know what, I've never held a scythe in my life, and yet it feels so natural, and it's like my body just knows what to do. And this ties into what I was saying in the last video, where I was like, how the heck is he using Alice's powers? Alice isn't even there. She's nowhere near him, and yet he has these powers. And Alice herself has even said that their connection seems to be weakening, and yet his ability to use her abilities seems to be strengthening. So this kind of calls into this whole thing of what exactly is Oz, especially when we get this huge reveal, which is that this threw me. I got to admit, I did not see this coming at all. We find out that in order to stop Glenn from reincarnating, what they did was they killed Jack, and supposedly he volunteered for this. They killed Jack and hacked his body into pieces and used each body part as basically the element to seal Glenn's soul. So the long and short of this, obviously, is that since Glenn failed to insert his soul into Gilbert and he was killed, he, for whatever reason, has 100 cycles, so I guess 100 years, that before he can be reawakened or he will be reborn again. And this curse effectively seals him away so that he cannot be reborn as Glenn Baskerville. His soul cannot come out and influence. And even at the end of this one, we actually see the Baskervilles finding one of Jack's body parts. We find out that this is sort of what they've been searching for, right? Is these body parts to release the seal so that they can find out where Glenn's soul has arrived. Now, again, this goes into my whole thing, like Elliot's having these flashbacks. Is that the soul within him trying to assert itself? And as the sort of bonds are broken, as these body parts are destroyed, will there be more and more of Glenn within Elliot? Or again, is that just sort of a red herring and Glenn is somewhere else? I still don't know. But we find out that in the same way that they've used sort of these body parts of Jack Vesalius to hide the soul of Glenn, that Oz is sort of a vessel to hide the presence of Jack Vesalius. So this kind of, when they said this, I was like, so then does that mean I was right? Like Oz is somehow manufactured, created, like I wonder, okay, so now this is just me postulating here, and honestly, I'm just thinking of this like as I'm talking about it. I wonder if they did the same sort of thing where Oz as a child had somehow the soul, like if Jack Vesalius was immortal the same way as Glenn, and Jack's soul was somehow put into Oz, and that somehow they've used like some other kind of thing in order to prevent Jack from completely coming to the surface, which would explain maybe why Oz, there's always those questions about why his personality seems to be so wishy-washy or empty. Okay. Yeah, maybe this is what's happening. Because the whole thing that we find out from the Baskervilles who are being tortured by Break is that the reason they want to toss Oz into the abyss is because if they do that, then the presence of Jack Vesalius goes in with him, and the intention of the abyss won't notice it. But if Oz is either killed or is used in some way by someone else, then the presence of Jack and Vesalius may be known to the abyss, and then the intention of the abyss will be beyond anyone's control. And so the Baskervilles are kind of like, yeah, we want to get rid of him because Oz can be used by others to manipulate the abyss, but we want to manipulate the abyss ourselves. And it turns out, I guess, that the Baskervilles, this has kind of been their mission. This has been their raison d'etre, that they've existed for this, because at the end, another Baskerville emerges from the gate, and we find out that they used to be able to just travel through the abyss willy-nilly, no problem, and now they get lost in there because everything has been thrown out of whack, because the intention of the abyss now has this ego and this personality and is beyond their control. And on top of all of this, we have Oz's dad showing up, once again being a complete douche to Oz. And we find out, like from Gil, that he says to Break later on when he goes to kill Oz's dad. I don't think we really need to get into that. I mean, I want to kill Oz's dad. I got to be honest. Like, part of me is like, I wouldn't be hurt to see him fall into a deep hole. But anyway, so he says to Break, after Break has kind of stopped him from doing this, he says to him, I know that Oz's dad was the one who threw him into the abyss, that he used Griffin to put Oz into the abyss. And we later see Zy Vesalius with Lottie, with the Baskervilles. And it's clear that he's in league with them. And now this kind of makes sense, right? Because we know that a black-winged chain has to be used in order to open the abyss. And since Raven didn't have like an owner, because we know that Gil obviously came along and became its owner. So since Raven didn't have an owner, and since it seems that the current Duke Barbas and Lady Sharon's mom, I can never remember her name, since the two of them seem to want to have nothing to do with the Baskervilles, it falls to the Duke Vesalius. And I kind of wonder, now that I am theorizing, thinking about this, had this wild sort of imagining, I wonder if that's why. Like, I'm wondering if the whole thing about Jack being put into Oz was done without Zy Vesalius's knowledge, or without his consent. And that is what's made him hate Oz, because he doesn't see Oz as his son. He sees it as this just blank abomination that has had Jack forced into it. And that as far as he's concerned, his son died when they put Jack in there. That would make some sense. That would actually work. That would make some sense to me. And it would, again, when we have a series that seems to be providing strong motivations for all of the individual characters for what they do, like I said, this volume definitely gave us Gil and Vincent's motivations. It would make sense that Zy Vesalius would have some very strong motivation for treating his son that way and thinking of his son that way. Maybe that's why. This is my theory. We're going to see how it plays out. But in any case, so Zy Vesalius, Duke Vesalius, he's working with the Baskervilles. We know that the chains of Glenn Baskerville at least were divvied up between the 4 dukedoms. And so we know that that's probably how they obtained power and influence, but we still don't know how they did that. We still don't know we still don't know who where Glenn's soul really is. And I'm guessing now the rest of this book series is going to start looking at this hunt for the body parts of Jack Vesalius. Body part. Is that where the headhunter thing comes into it? Like literally Jack's head, hunting for the head of Jack Vesalius? It could be why, if Gilbert knew anything, it could be why he was really quick to sort of say, no, leave Oz out of it. But how would he know? Because Barbas just found out about this whole spell when he was talking to the lady. So no, that doesn't work. But I don't know. Obviously, there's going to be this headhunter thing play into things. There's now this hunt for the body parts of Jack Vesalius in order to free the soul of Glenn Baskerville. We know that somehow the chains of Glenn Baskerville were stolen by the other families. We know that Oz is somehow a vessel that exists to hide Jack Vesalius from the abyss. Wow, so much stuff was revealed in this volume. It's awesome. Awesome. So, volume number 10 of Pandora Hearts. I am sure I have missed a lot of things because so much happened in this volume. But I leave that up to you guys in the comments. You haven't let me down so far. Last video, somebody pointed out that I hadn't mentioned about Vincent and Ada going on the date. In the one beforehand, they had mentioned the whole music box and music. So if I forgot something that you want to talk about, by all means, throw it down into the comments and we can have a discussion there, because this video is already over 20 minutes by my tape. So thank you very much again for hanging in there with me on another one of these longish, rantish type videos. I am loving this series. I see why so many of you are excited and in love with this series. And I will be back for volume number 11. I'm trying to pump these out at least one a week because I want to read this series and find out what happens. So I don't want to leave it any longer. Thanks again for watching, and I will see you in the next one, hopefully next week. Till then, bye-bye for now.